Hello everybody and welcome back to Unlocking Unreal Engine. It's been a minute. If you remember, last time we went ahead and we learned about event dispatchers and specifically tying things to a switch. But of course, it doesn't have to be a switch. It could be any event that gets bound to something and then it has its own definition on what to do. However, something that we don't have is we don't have a reticle on the screen, which means looking at certain things can be difficult. Right now, we have very easy things like, for example, this giant chair or this door. However, what if we had a nice little prompt that would pop up that says, hey, you're looking at something, and then maybe a reticle to help them see where the center of the screen is. To do this, we're going to first have to learn about the HUD. The HUD is lit. God, please. To do this, we first have to learn about the HUD. The HUD lives inside the player controller, and it is a great place to put a lot of your UI elements. There's occasional situations you may not put something in the HUD, but for the most part, you want to use it in the HUD because the HUD is accessed globally, which means you can easily turn things on and off. So to do that, I'm going to hit Control Space to open the content drawer. We're going to go into my folders here, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder. We're going to call this UI, and we're going to open that up. But before we put anything in there, I actually lied. We're going to go back to my overall folder, and I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a new folder and call it Systems. This is the first system we're going to create that's not going to be the default one in Unreal Engine. It's very simple. That sounds complicated, but open up Systems, right click, and what you're going to do is you're going to go up here to Blueprint class and you're going to click on it. And we're actually not going to pick any of these options. Instead, we're going to open up all classes. And within all classes, we are going to type in HUD. So capital HUD. And you'll see we have HUD, debug, and visual. We just want the regular HUD. So go ahead and click on it and hit select. And because it's a HUD, the naming convention will be HUD underscore whatever the game name is. In my case, we'll just put unlocking UE for Unreal Engine, Control Shift S to save all. And now we have where our HUD, specifically the code, is going to take place. But we need to tell the engine that that's the HUD we want to use and not the default that Unreal provides. So in order to do that, we're also going to right click again. We're going to create a Blueprint class. And this time we actually have what we need up here at the top. We're going to click on Game Mode Base. I'm going to call this GM for Game Mode underscore unlocking UE, Control Shift S. Now, what is a game mode? So the HUD is a place where all the HUD takes place, but what about the game mode? Well, let's open it up and take a look. As you can see, it starts on the viewport. We actually don't need the viewport in the game mode. To be honest, I'm not 100% sure why it exists. But that being said, if we look at the details on the right-hand side, and the only way you can see them, by the way, is make sure you have this selected on the left, you'll see that there's certain things we can set, like the game session state, which player controller we want to use, the state class, and notice the HUD class. This is where we can tell the system what HUD we're going to be using for this specific game mode, because technically you can have several different game modes. For example, if you're playing something like Mario Party, you're going to have a different game mode for moving around the board versus racing in a race game. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this drop down menu, and we're going to choose our HUD unlocking UE. And that is set there, and we will hit compile and save. But there's one last step, because of course there is. Now we have to go to the project settings. If your project settings isn't there, just simply go up here to edit, and then you can go to the project settings right here. And we're going to go to the search, and I'm going to type in game mode. And then right now the default game mode is of course the first person game mode, but we're going to change this over to the GM unlocking Unreal Engine. Now you'll notice, by the way, the selected game mode, you can actually make the changes here as well. I could change the HUD, the default pawn, stuff like that. However, having separate game modes for different situations is probably the best way to go about it. So that's why we're setting it in the game mode, and then the options are here as well. Don't worry. Okay, so we have a game mode that now knows we have our own custom HUD. The game mode is selected in the project settings. So now when we hit Control Space, we're going to go over to our BP's folder. I'm going to go into UI, and I'm going to right click, and you'll notice that we have an option for user interface. We're going to make a widget blueprint. We don't need to select any of the classes here. We're just going to go ahead and click on user widget. And the naming convention for this is simply W for widget. And I'm going to do widget underscore main canvas. Now, the thing is, whenever you're creating widgets, you typically only want to have one canvas, and then you'll add and remove things to that canvas. If that sounds complicated right now, don't worry. It will be simple for now. Don't worry. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to open up our main canvas here. And it looks a lot kind of like the event graph on a normal blueprint. But this is actually, in a way, the viewport for our widget. Now at the top right, you'll see that we have screen size. So if you want to go ahead and set a specific screen size, you can. I'm not going to. By default, it's already set up to, as you can see at the bottom left here, 1280 by 720, 16 by 9. Honestly, these first two numbers aren't going to be a big deal for what we're doing. Now, obviously, you can change this to see what your UI is going to look like on different monitors, different screens. The main thing I'm concerned with just adding a reticle and maybe like a little pop-up that says, hey, press F to interact, is this 16 by 9, simply because that is the most common aspect ratio for monitors, 16 by 9, 16 by 10. There is a couple extra that get used, and you can mess with that. But we're not going to. I'm mostly telling you just so you have the information. And then next to the screen size is fill screen. Now for us, we're actually going to leave it on fill screen for the canvas specifically. So up here at the top left on the palette, I'm going to go ahead and type in canvas. As I said, that's basically all this widget's going to be. We're going to drag this out and place it, and we're going to hit compile and save. And now we have our main canvas. I'm going to leave this here. Also, notice, by the way, the canvas fills the entire screen. Now at the top right, clearly we have it set to fill screen, but canvases by default will fill the entire screen. You can see this is the same shape as a 16 by 9 monitor. So let's leave this open, and we'll create a separate widget and we'll add it to the canvas. So I'm going to hit Control Space. We have our canvas. Now I'm going to right click. I'm going to create, or go to the user interface. We're going to go to the widget blueprint. We're going to make a user widget. I'm going to do W underscore, and this time we'll just say, how do you spell reticle? Reticle. So R-E-T-I-C-L-E, I think. I'm going to check. Okay, that is correct. So now we're also going to open up the reticle here. And this time, instead of doing the fill screen, we're going to set this to desired. Actually, you keep yours on fill screen. You keep yours on desired. I'm going to keep mine on fill screen because I want to show you what it does. If I go over here and I type in image, because that's what we're going to do, is we're going to add an image. If I drag that out here, watch what happens. Boom! It takes up the entire screen. That's not what we want. What we want to do is go over here and set this to desired. And all of a sudden, you'll see that it is a much smaller box. Why is it a much smaller box? Well, because on the left, you'll see that we have the image selected, which means in the details panel, we're looking at the details for it. And if I open up the brush and the color and opacity here, specifically the image size, here we go, you'll see that we are set to 32 by 32. However, if I put this to fill screen, this is where things get confusing. Notice that we're still 32 by 32, but we're still filling the entire screen. So anytime you're not working specifically with the canvas or something that's intentionally meant to fill the entire screen, make sure we're going to desired, or you're going to get really weird results. Now, let's keep things clean. I'm going to change this from just image to image underscore reticle, like that. And that's a pretty big reticle, but for now, we're going to say that's good enough. We're going to hit compile and save, and we'll make adjustments in just a moment. So now we just have a 32 by 32 box as a widget. If we go back to the main canvas now, on our palette, we can actually start typing in the name of what we just created. So if I type in W underscore reticle like this, notice I can actually drag that onto the screen. And all of a sudden, now we have the reticle on the screen. However, notice that it looks really weird. It's not 32 by 32. There's a lot of reasons for this, but I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible with the least amount of tools as possible, and we'll start adding complexity as time goes on. But for now, Why is this not 32 by 32? Well, if you look, we have the reticle selected, but on the right-hand side, our size is 140. So if we take this, we make it 32 by 32, that is the widget we created, and it's not being warped. Now, see this big old sun looking thing up here at the top left? That is our anchors. What is an anchor? Basically, whenever something is anchored to a certain point, it will remain the same amount of pixels away from that anchor no matter how big the screen is. So, for example, if we take our anchors, which you can see with this selected, if I click this like middle dot one, it'll drop the anchor down to the left-hand side of the screen. What that's saying is if this left-hand side was to keep going and keep going, because this is anchored to the left middle, this will stay that many pixels away. So this will get dragged over with it as it starts getting pulled to the left. So what you're trying to do is anchor it to a position that makes sense for where it's located. So in this case, we're anchoring it to the center of the screen. So the best way to do that is to click on this little middle one here, and it'll put the anchor in the dead center. However, you'll notice the dead center and where our reticle currently is not correct. So what we're going to do is, you see how we have position -12 and position 23? Let's set these to 0, 0. Uh-oh, but it's still not correct. Look, now all of a sudden, even though the anchor is in the dead center of the screen, our reticle is also anchored to the top left. So 0, 0 for our reticle is the top left. Is this getting confusing enough for you yet? I sure hope so. So what we're going to do to fix that is, with our reticle selected, under anchors, if we hit Control Shift and then we click the middle right here, watch this. Boop. There. It is now perfectly centered, and our anchor within the reticle is the center, and the anchor compared to the monitor is also the center, meaning that no matter what, the reticle will now be in the very center of the canvas. We're going to hit compile and save. Now, obviously that reticle is pretty big. If we were to go show you it, which by the way, it's not going to work. If I hit play, oh God, it didn't work. It's because we're not actually adding it to the screen yet. So we got to get it to pop up. So in order to do that, we need to hit Control Space. And now what we need to do is we actually need to go into Systems and actually open up that HUD that we created that we're now using. And we don't care about the viewport. We're going to go straight into the event graph. And we need to do a couple things. Let's go ahead and create a custom event that creates the canvas and the reticle. And then we'll create a couple of custom events that can add them or remove them from the screen. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a custom event. I'm going to call this, did I say crawl? I'm going to call this init underscore canvas. And out of init underscore canvas, we're going to pull from the execution pin and we are going to create a widget. And you'll see we get to select a class. So the class we're going to select is going to be the main canvas that we created. And then, so we can reference this widget and not recreate it every single time, because disclaimer, every time you create a widget, if you haven't actually deleted it from memory, it's going to stay there. So if you create the widget 20 times, it exists 20 times in memory. So how we're going to avoid this from happening is, with the return value, is we're going to pull out and we're going to promote this to a variable. The variable we just created is a direct reference to the widget for specifically main canvas that we just created. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the new variable is there. I'm going to hit F2 and I'm going to rename this to just main canvas. Now we're going to do something a little strange. We're going to unplug the execution pin. I'm going to drag this down into the right slightly. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull a reference to the main canvas and grab a get on it. We're going to right click it and we're going to convert this to a validated get. So what does that do? A validated get basically says, does this exist? If it does, do a thing. If it doesn't, do another thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, if this is not valid, as in it doesn't exist, you're going to run this bottom branch that simply says, hey, create it and set it. And actually, I'm going to pull this up because I'm used to having to do something different whenever I do this, but we are just doing the init. This simply creates it and gets the reference made for us. So for now, the init canvas is good to go. Okay, so now we're going to create another custom event where we actually add it to the screen. So we have the init canvas, but now we're going to show the canvas. Now, I like to do something special here, so I can call show canvas for two purposes. If I click on my show canvas custom event, I'm going to add an input that's going to be called show ? And I'll show you what I'm going to do with that in just a moment. Let's go ahead and create a branch for it though. So I'm going to hold B and click. You can right click and type branch, but B and click is faster. So we'll go ahead and connect that. I'll right click my branch and I'll simply say, is show true? If show is true, that means we want it to display on the screen. So we're going to get a reference to our main canvas, and we're going to pull out of the main canvas reference, and we're just going to hit add to viewport, and that will be for true. So whenever we call show canvas, if we mark it as true, then what we're going to do is add it to the viewport. However, if we call show canvas and we set show to false, we want to remove from parent. It's a little backwards, I know. You have viewport and then you have parent, but the parent is the viewport, so that's why they do that. It's a little strange, but it is what it is. And we'll hit compile and save. Then I'll grab this bit of code here and I'll press C, and I'm going to just name this canvas because this is all of the canvas logic. And so now let's look at our code. We can create it so it exists in memory, and because it exists in memory, we can then either show it or remove it. Okay, so now we're going to create an interface. Now, you guys already know what interfaces are. Remember, we created one for interactions. Blueprints, by default, they can't communicate with one another. However, if you give them that interface, it basically gives them a list of events that they can react to and have their own definition for. So we're actually going to create a new one because interaction is not going to be for the HUD. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to go up to Blueprint, and I'm going to click Blueprint Interface. We're going to call this BPI _ HUD because this will be for HUD interactions. Control-Shift-S to save all, and we're going to open up that HUD. By default, we just have new function. I'm going to go over here to the right-hand side and click it and press F2 so I can rename it. And I'm going to rename this show canvas _ request. We're going to hit Control-Shift-S, and for input, we are going to need show ? Because remember, we have it set up so whenever we try to show the canvas, it now has a dual functionality of also being able to hide it as well. So that should be good. We're going to go ahead and close this. And I actually want to add a quick line of code to our HUD. I apologize for missing this initially. I'm trying to keep this as unconfusing as possible, so bear with me. What we're going to do here is, you see how we are either adding it or removing it. We need something to make sure this gets called suggested it doesn't exist already. So what I'm going to do is take all of this code and move it to the right. We can keep this line directly in. However, the execution pin I am going to remove. And simply put, I'm just going to grab main canvas again, and I'm going to do a get. I'm going to right click it, do a validated get like we've done before. And simply put, if it's valid, continue with the code. If it's not valid, we need to run an init on the canvas like that. And there we go. So you can see why this extra bit of code that I forgot to add is useful, because it's basically saying, hey, if it's not valid, we're actually trying to use it. So you need to make sure it's initiated. Which of course, let's move this back over. Because after it initiates, we also want it to do the thing, right? Show or hide. So there we go. There we go. Compile and save. We do need to go to the class settings and go to our implemented interfaces though, and we need to add the new one we just created. So I'm gonna type in BPI and we're gonna click on HUD to make sure it's implementing that. Compile, save. Then I'm going to go to the left-hand side. I'm going to go to interfaces and click on show canvas request. And of course, the show canvas request is actually just going to run the show canvas custom event that we created. And we will plug the show straight in, just like that. And I will expand the comment to include this new code. And there we go. Compile and save. So let's recap because this is a lot, okay? We had to create a game mode and a HUD. The game mode has a list of special things that get dictated depending on which game mode is in play. We only created one though, and the only thing we've changed is which HUD we're using because we can't really access the default one that Unreal Engine has. In that HUD, we have created a way to get canvas into memory, and we've created a custom event that either checks to make sure it's in memory, and if it's not, to add it to it, or if it does already exist, we are either trying to show or hide that canvas. We also made an interface, so it's very easy to send the HUD messages, and in this case, we sent basically in that interface, we created the custom event that we already have, and we just simply said, hey, we have a definition for this already, so when you receive the request, just go ahead and run the definition. This episode is information packed, so we might not get to the press F to interact section, because this is dense. I know, I'm sorry. Okay, now, believe it or not, it still won't show up on the screen, but it is ready to accept the ability to end up on the screen. And the way that we're going to do that, there's a couple ways you can do this. I like to use the level blueprint because the main menu level is going to have a different game mode than the normal game is going to also have a different game mode, for example. So I'm going to go to the first person map. We've used the level blueprint before. I'm going to click on this little grid thing, and I'm going to open the level blueprint. You'll remember this is where we bound a whole bunch of stuffs to event dispatchers. I'm going to go ahead and right click, and I'm going to create a custom event that just says prepare UI. And the reason I call it prepare UI is because each level is going to have different elements that need to be activated and deactivated. In this case, we just have the canvas and we want it to show up on screen. So we're going to right click. We're going to get player controller, because as I said, remember the HUD exists within the player controller. With the player controller, I'm going to pull out and get the HUD. Now you'll notice this is just labeled HUD. That's because this is a generic call. Whenever something is a generic call, it's saying, I don't care what HUD is receiving this. I just know I'm handing it to a HUD. So, for example, if I was to pull out here, I can't call a custom event that we've created because this is a very specific HUD that has init canvas in it. Whereas this being a generic call, it doesn't know what HUD it's handing it to, so it can't run anything. As you can see, it's like, I don't know what HUD I'm handing it to, so I can't promise you that I can even do the thing that you're supposedly looking for. I hope that makes sense. But that's why we have the interface. So, out of the execution pin, I'm simply going to type in show canvas, and you'll see that we have the request, and then in parentheses, message. We'll click on that. And of course, the target is going to be the HUD. And the reason you can send an interface to a generic call, not a specific call, is because an interface message can go to anything. It's just whether or not it has a definition for it. I hope that makes sense. So we're going to send the HUD a show canvas request, and we are specifically going to want to show it. Now, there are instances, by the way, where you don't want all your HUD to just show up immediately. That's when you would probably create additional interface messages that are just there to say, hey, I need you to initiate this, this, and this so it's in memory. So that way when we call it, we can open and close it. Like imagine you're playing an MMORPG or just an RPG in general. You open your inventory, you close your inventory. But when the game starts, typically your inventory is not open already. So that'd be a situation where you need it initialized, but it doesn't need to be on screen. However, again, we just have the canvas, show canvas request, which in our case, we are trying to show it. And we'll add that to the event begin play. So after we bind the lights, we will go ahead and also prepare the UI. compile and save. So now what we can do is we'll head to the first person map, and when we hit play, it should pull up in the canvas, and we should see the reticle that takes place on the canvas. We don't. Great. So there's actually a reason why it didn't work, and this is because there's another area that can override your game settings. It seems like a lot, and that's because it is. I'm not mad, you're mad. On the right hand side, there's also something called world settings. If yours is not there, I believe, yes, it's in window, world settings. Mine's over here though. And you'll notice that there's a game mode override. This is a level specific override. Now this makes sense, right? Whenever the Mario Party level loads where you have to spam A to blow up a balloon, that's going to be a different game mode override than when you're in the main menu or you're running around the board. So it makes sense that each level can override the game mode, but in order for ours to freaking work, we also have to change it here. So I'm going to open up this, and we're going to change this over to the unlocking UE game mode, and we're going to hit save, and we're going to hit play. Now you can see the reticle that we created is actually on screen. You'll notice that we're flying, and that's because the pawn we set up isn't selected in the game mode. So in the game mode, you'll see it just says default pawn. This needs to be BP first person character. Dear Lord. And we're going to go ahead and hit Control-Shift-S and play. And now we're actually playing our character, but notice it's not receiving inputs. Holy hell. It's like, I'm not even trying to be lazy about it. I know how to explain this. I know what's going on. The frustrating part is it's becoming more confusing for you by the second. I'm trying. Blame Unreal Engine. In order to get the controls to work, we have to take the BP player controller class and set this to the first person player controller. I'm making sure none of these have another first person specific thing. They don't, thank the Lord. Hit save, hit play, and you know what? Now you can walk around and look and stuff, and you got a reticle. I did it. Oh my god, dude. Holy hell. Okay. I hope you were able to follow why all this was working the way it was. The main thing here, okay, is specifically how to initiate something for the HUD, as in get it into memory, create it, and make it a variable, right? Then, using that variable, we can display or not display it, as in add to viewport or remove from parent. As for creating widgets, I'm not very good at it. That's why our reticle is going to be a square, and why we're just going to use a canvas for now. I do want to get better at it, and we will expand on UI elements as this goes on. But for now, you can see it's a little big. You know how to change the size, though. We covered that. Back on page 3427 in this one episode, we discussed the size of the reticle. But no, seriously, I love all you guys. Thank you so much for, putting the effort in, learning how to do this stuff, and not just having things handed to you. You guys are great. I appreciate everyone that uses critical thought. And thank you for being patient with me as we moved into 2025. The start of my year has been a nuclear bomb, and I'm not about to go into it. Just understand life sucks ass, and I'm trying. But seriously, like, comment, subscribe. Got a Patreon down below and all that. I'll see you guys in the next one.